What would you do if someone told you they'd rather face exile than spend another day in your home? That's exactly what Leary told Marcus Chen the moment she stepped through his doorway. Her silver hair still shimmering with the residual energy from the transport gate, her luminescent skin catching the afternoon sunlight streaming through his Montana farmhouse windows. Those distinctly pointed ears marking her as unmistakably Veloran, despite her otherwise human appearance, making her look like she'd stepped out of a fashion magazine rather than across 3-star systems. "Send me back," she said, her voice steady, but her expressive violet eyes betraying something close to panic. Her hands trembling slightly as she clutched a small travel case that probably contained everything she owned. The fitted tactical pants and sleek fitted jacket she wore making her look both foreign and somehow perfectly designed for the life she was about to reject. Marcus stood frozen in his doorway, his weathered hands still holding the acceptance papers from the intergalactic relocation and companionship program. Completely unprepared for the gorgeous alien woman who had just traveled 3,000 light-years specifically to refuse him. "I'm sorry," Leary continued, her accent musical, but her words cutting. "I reviewed the contract 14 times during transit, and I cannot fulfill the terms. I cannot adapt to primitive conditions. And I certainly cannot pretend to feel something that would take years to develop. So please, just process the return authorization and I'll face whatever consequences await me on Velora." Marcus finally found his voice, though it came out rougher than he intended, after years of talking mostly to livestock and the occasional supply drone. "Ma'am, I think there's been a misunderstanding. I didn't actually apply to the program. I wouldn't even know how. I'm just a farmer trying to keep his land operational and raise my son after my wife passed. So if someone signed me up, it wasn't me." Lyra's expression shifted from determination to confusion, her brow furrowing in a way that made her look vulnerable rather than alien. "You didn't request a companion through the program? But the selection was confirmed. The compatibility algorithms ran for 3 months. Someone from this address specifically chose me from among thousands of applicants." Before Marcus could respond, a small voice came from behind him, bright with excitement and completely unaware of the tension crackling in the room. "She's here, Dad. She's really here. I knew she'd come." 8-year-old Jamie Chen pushed past his father's legs, his face lit up with pure joy. His tablet clutched in his hands, showing what appeared to be an elaborate profile page with Lyra's image and detailed information in both English and flowing Veloran script. Marcus felt his stomach drop as understanding crashed over him like a cold wave. "Jamie, what did you do?" But the boy was already talking, words tumbling out in an excited rush as he looked up at Leary like she was the answer to every wish he'd ever made. "I used Dad's login to apply. I did all the surveys. I answered all the compatibility questions. I even used my birthday money to pay the application fee, because Dad is always alone and sad, even when he pretends he's not. And you're perfect. You listed that you like science and teaching, and you wanted to learn about Earth agriculture, and you have the same favorite color as my mom used to have, and the algorithm said you were a 97% match." Leary stared at the child, and Marcus watched something in her expression crack, the professional detachment giving way to genuine shock and what might have been the beginning of tears. "A child chose me? The legally binding contract I signed, the one I abandoned my research position for, the one I left my entire life behind to honor, was initiated by an 8-year-old human child." Her voice had gone quiet, and Marcus couldn't tell if she was about to laugh or scream or simply vanish back through the transport gate through sheer force of will. Marcus ran his hand through his graying hair, exhaustion and embarrassment and a strange protective instinct all warring in his chest. "Jamie, buddy, you can't just order people like they're supplies from the Agri Collective. Go to your room while I fix this." But Jamie's eyes had filled with tears, his voice cracking in that way that still broke Marcus's heart, even after 2 years of single parenting. "But Dad, you're lonely. I hear you talking to Mom's picture at night. And the school counselor said it's okay to want help. And the program said they match people who need each other. And Miss Leary needed a new start. And we need family. And I thought maybe." He didn't finish, just buried his face against Marcus's side, shoulders shaking with suppressed sobs. The silence that followed felt heavy enough to crush them all, broken only by Jamie's sniffling and the distant sound of the wind turbines that powered the farm humming their eternal song. Leary stood perfectly still, and Marcus noticed her hands had stopped trembling. Noticed the way she was looking at Jamie, with an expression he couldn't quite decipher. Something tender and painful and utterly unexpected. When she finally spoke, her voice was softer, the edge of panic replaced by something that sounded almost like wonder. On Velora, children have no legal standing. They don't make decisions. They don't access interstellar programs. They certainly don't attempt to restructure their family units through unauthorized diplomatic channels. She knelt down slowly, bringing herself to eye level with Jamie, her movements graceful and deliberate. What you did was impossible by my culture's standards. Do you understand? Impossible, illogical, and somehow the most honest thing anyone has done in my presence in years. Jamie peeked out from his father's shirt, his tear-streaked face showing confusion and a fragile hope. Does that mean you'll stay? Leary shook her head, but she was almost smiling, a real expression finally breaking through her controlled facade. It means I don't know what it means, young human. It means my entire framework for understanding the universe just shifted, and I need time to process that. She looked up at Marcus, and he found himself caught in those violet eyes, seeing intelligence and fear and a desperate kind of courage that he recognized from his own mirror. I cannot fulfill a romantic contract with a stranger. That hasn't changed, but perhaps we can discuss alternative arrangements. The program has provisions for cultural exchange positions, educational placements. I could tutor your son, help with farm optimization using Veloran techniques, pay my way rather than fulfill a role I'm not prepared for. Marcus felt something unknot in his chest, tension he hadn't realized he was carrying, releasing all at once. That sounds reasonable. And Jamie, you and I are going to have a long talk about boundaries and consent and not signing people up for life-changing commitments without asking. But first, let's get Miss Leary settled in the guest room and figure this out like civilized beings. What Marcus didn't expect was how easily Leary folded into their lives over the following weeks. How her initial cold efficiency melted into something warmer and infinitely more complex as she discovered Earth through Jamie's relentless questions and Marcus's quiet demonstrations of farm life. She had a gift for teaching, breaking down complex astrophysics into stories that made Jamie's eyes light up with understanding. But she also had a vulnerability that emerged in unexpected moments, like when she tasted strawberries for the first time and went completely silent. Tears streaming down her luminous face because her home world had lost all its fruit-bearing plants to a plague centuries ago, and she'd only read about fresh fruit in historical texts. She told them about Velora during dinner one evening, her voice steady, but her hands wrapped around a mug of tea like it was an anchor. We're a dying people, not in population, but in spirit. We've optimized everything: efficiency, longevity, resource distribution. And in doing so, we've somehow optimized away joy, connection, the messy, beautiful chaos that makes life worth living. She looked at Marcus over the rim of her mug, and he saw centuries of cultural exhaustion in her eyes, despite her young face. That's why I applied to the program, not for romance, though that was the category I qualified for, but for escape, for the chance to be somewhere that still remembered how to be imperfect and alive. Jamie, who had been pushing vegetables around his plate, looked up with that serious expression he got when he was really thinking. Is that why you wanted to go back? Because you were scared we'd be too much chaos? Leary considered this with the same gravity she gave all of Jamie's questions, never condescending, always honest. I was scared I wouldn't know how to be enough for you, either of you. I've spent my whole life being measured against impossible standards, and I thought I'd step through that gate and immediately fail at being whatever you needed. Rejection felt safer than inevitable disappointment. She glanced at Marcus, and something passed between them, an understanding born of similar wounds. But I'm learning that maybe failure isn't the worst thing. Maybe the worst thing is never trying because the outcome isn't guaranteed. The turning point came 6 weeks after her arrival. On an ordinary Tuesday that started with alarms blaring across the farm's security system and Marcus sprinting toward the equipment barn, where flames were already licking through the roof. Decades of stored fuel and irreplaceable machinery about to turn into ash and economic ruin. Leary appeared beside him in seconds, her hair pulled back, her expression focused and calm in a way that made her look both alien and utterly capable. Do you trust me? She asked, and Marcus, watching his livelihood burn, found himself nodding without hesitation. She closed her eyes, and her skin began to glow. Not the subtle luminescence he'd grown accustomed to, but a brilliant radiance that made him shield his eyes. And he realized he'd never actually seen a Veloran use their abilities. Never understood that her people could manipulate electromagnetic fields, could sense and redirect energy in ways that human science was still struggling to theorize. The flames bent, twisted, collapsed inward as she pulled the heat away from the structure and into the earth, harmlessly dissipating enough energy to power a small city into the ground beneath their feet. Her whole body shaking with effort, blood starting to drip from her nose from the strain of controlling such massive forces. When it was over, the barn was damaged, but standing. The equipment scorched but salvageable, and Leary was on her knees in the dirt, gasping for breath, her glow faded to almost nothing. Looking more vulnerable than Marcus had ever seen her. He dropped beside her without thinking, his hands hovering over her shoulders, unsure if touch was welcome, but desperate to help somehow. Why would you do that? You could have hurt yourself, really hurt yourself. She looked up at him, her face streaked with soot and blood, and smiled with such openness it made his heart ache. Because this is your home, Jamie's home. And somewhere in the last 6 weeks, it started to feel like mine too. And you protect what's yours, even when it's terrifying. Even when you're not sure you're strong enough. Isn't that what you do every single day? Something shifted between them in that moment. The careful, professional distance they'd maintained, evaporating like morning frost under sunlight. And Marcus found himself really seeing her. Not as the alien woman his son had accidentally ordered, or the exchange educator fulfilling a modified contract, but as Leary, brilliant and damaged and trying so hard to be brave in a world that wasn't her own. You saved everything, he said quietly, his voice rough with emotions he hadn't let himself feel since his wife died, since he'd locked himself into the safe routine of grief and responsibility and just getting through each day. You barely know us, and you saved everything. She leaned into his touch as he finally let his hand rest on her shoulder, her eyes closing briefly like she was memorizing the feeling. I know you enough. I know Jamie asks questions like breathing, and you answer every single one, even when you're exhausted, because you never want him to stop being curious. I know you talk to the memory of your wife with love instead of bitterness, because you choose gratitude over anger every day. I know you've been kind to an alien stranger who showed up rejecting you before you'd even met. And I know that somewhere along the way, I stopped wanting to leave and started wanting to stay. Really stay, not as obligation, but as choice. Marcus felt tears burning in his eyes, felt the walls he'd built cracking open. The program contract, your legal status, we'd have to refile, change the terms to something real instead of Jamie's well-intentioned chaos. Leary laughed, the sound bright and genuine. I think I'm beginning to appreciate human chaos, the unpredictable, unauthorized, completely illogical chaos that leads to impossible things like hope and second chances and family built from nothing but need and choice and stubborn determination to make it work. She stood, offering him her hand, and he took it, letting her pull him to his feet. Both of them covered in soot and exhausted and grinning like fools. So we try? Slowly, honestly. No contracts or algorithms or pressure, just 3 people figuring out how to be a family. Marcus asked, his hand still holding hers, marveling at how natural it felt. We try, she confirmed, and then Jamie was there, having apparently watched the entire thing from the house, launching himself at both of them in a hug that nearly toppled them all back into the dirt. 6 months later, Marcus stood in the same doorway where he'd first met Leary, watching her teach Jamie about stellar navigation using a homemade projection of the night sky, her silver hair catching the lamplight, her laugh ringing through the house, at something his son said, and felt a peace he'd thought he'd never find again. She'd officially changed her program status from relocation bride to cultural integration specialist with family placement, a bureaucratic mouthful that basically meant she was staying by choice rather than contract, building a life rather than fulfilling an obligation. She still had moments of homesickness, still struggled with Earth's inefficiencies and the emotional messiness of human relationships. But she faced them with courage and humor and a growing confidence that she was exactly where she belonged. The romantic relationship developing between them was slow and tentative, built on morning coffee, conversations and shared parenting decisions and the 1,000 tiny intimacies of building a life together. Nothing like the instant connection the original contract had implied, but something deeper and more real because it was chosen daily rather than assumed. Jamie had gotten his long talk about consent and boundaries. But he'd also gotten something he'd wished for in the desperate way of children who've lost too much too young, proof that his family could grow. That love could happen more than once, that asking for help wasn't weakness, but the bravest thing you could do. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the Montana sky in impossible colors, Leary leaned her head against Marcus's shoulder and said quietly, "I came here running from disappointment and ready to run again at the first sign of failure. But your son, impossible, illogical, beautiful child that he is, didn't let me run. He chose me before I chose myself, and that changed everything." Marcus wrapped his arm around her, breathing in the scent of her hair that always smelled faintly of ozone and starlight. "He has a gift for seeing what people need before they know it themselves. I'm just grateful his unauthorized interstellar shopping spree brought you to us," she laughed, tilting her face up to kiss him softly, the gesture still new enough to make his heart race. The best things in life seem to come from the most chaotic origins. "I'm learning. That's very human. And I'm learning. I want to be part of that chaos. Permanently, if you'll have me." He kissed her again, deeper this time, tasting her smile and feeling her warmth, and knowing without doubt that his answer would always be yes. "My son already chose you," he whispered against her lips, echoing the words he'd said that first difficult day, when everything was uncertain. "And now so do I, every day. For as long as you'll stay." From inside the house, Jamie called them for dinner, his voice bright with the unconscious happiness of a child who'd helped heal his family through sheer, stubborn love. And together they rose, hand in hand, walking into the warm light of home. No longer strangers bound by contract, but family bound by choice, the best kind of impossible.